Welcome to Archive Vault, where we explore declassified records, hidden histories, and state-level investigations. Please note, some illustrative narration is AI-generated for storytelling purposes. All content is educational and documentary-based. You are a parent in the 1940s. Your child has developmental challenges. You are told there is a state school in Massachusetts that can provide structure, education, and care. The Walter E. Fernald State School operates in Waltham. It houses boys described at the time as mentally disabled or socially troubled. The institution is large. It includes dormitories, classrooms, and medical facilities. It is funded by the state. During the years after World War II, the United States enters the atomic age. Nuclear weapons are developed. Radiation research expands. The federal government forms the Atomic Energy Commission. Scientists want to understand how radioactive materials move through the human body. They want data. They want measurements. At Fernald, researchers begin a nutrition study. It is presented as a program designed to improve the boys' health. Parents are approached with consent forms. Some are told their children may join a special science club. Some are told participation includes extra food and activities. The program appears positive. Better meals. Attention from researchers. The study focuses on how the body absorbs certain minerals. Oatmeal breakfasts are provided. Milk is served. What is not always clearly stated is that small amounts of radioactive tracers are added to some of the food. The tracers are used to measure how nutrients are processed. Records later show that the research was connected in part to funding from the Atomic Energy Commission. The stated goal is scientific understanding. The participants are boys living in a state institution. They rely on the school for daily care. They do not independently choose participation. Parents sign forms. The language of those forms will later be examined. The study continues for years. Data is collected, reports are written. Outside the school grounds, the public does not know the details. Inside, a government-funded research project is operating under the label of nutrition science. And the question begins quietly. When a child is in state custody, who decides what level of risk is acceptable? The program at Fernald was presented as a nutrition study. The boys who participated were placed in what was described as a special group. Some accounts later referred to it as a science club. They were offered incentives, extra portions, field trips, attention from staff. For children living in an institutional setting, these benefits carried weight. The research focused on how the body processed calcium and iron. To measure absorption, scientists used radioactive isotopes as tracers. Small amounts of radioactive calcium and iron were mixed into food, including oatmeal and milk. The doses were described by researchers as low and within what they considered safe research limits at the time. Blood samples were taken, stool samples were collected. Measurements were recorded. The purpose was to track how nutrients move through the body. Funding records later showed involvement from federal agencies connected to atomic research. The Atomic Energy Commission provided financial support for certain aspects of the study. The boys were not told they were consuming radioactive material. Many parents later stated they were not informed that radioactive substances would be involved. Consent forms described a nutrition study. They did not clearly state radiation exposure in plain terms. The experiments took place between the late 1940s and early 1950s. Dozens of boys participated over the course of the study. Researchers compiled data and published findings in scientific contexts. The radioactive tracers used were described as diagnostic tools rather than therapeutic treatments. At the time, federal oversight of human subject research was less structured than it would later become. Formal institutional review boards did not yet exist. Ethical standards were evolving. Within the walls of Fernald, the program was treated as legitimate science. The boys continued daily routines. Classes were held, meals were served, the radiation was invisible, the data was measurable, the documentation was filed, and for decades the details remained outside public awareness. For decades, the Fernald radiation study remained largely unknown outside academic and government circles. The boys grew up, some left the institution, some stayed for years. The published research existed in scientific literature, but the connection to vulnerable institutionalized children did not reach public attention. In the 1970s and 1980s, national conversations about human experimentation began to expand. Previous government programs involving radiation exposure were reviewed. Congressional hearings examined Cold War research practices. Requests for declassification increased. In the early 1990s, documents connected to radiation experiments surfaced through investigative reporting and federal review panels. Fernald was named among institutions where radiation studies had taken place. Families began to learn that radioactive tracers had been placed in food served to children at the school. Former students spoke publicly. Some said they remembered being part of a special breakfast group. Some remembered blood tests and medical procedures without understanding why. In 1994, the United States Department of Energy and other federal agencies acknowledged that radiation experiments had been conducted at Fernald with government funding. President Bill Clinton established the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments to review historical cases. The committee examined documents, consent forms, funding records, and published studies. The findings confirmed that radioactive isotopes had been administered to boys at the school as part of nutrition research partially funded by the Atomic Energy Commission. The review also examined whether informed consent had been adequately obtained. Questions centered on whether parents had been clearly told about the radioactive component of the study. In 1998, a settlement was reached in a class action lawsuit filed on behalf of former Fernald students and their families. The settlement provided financial compensation to participants. The case did not establish uniform medical harm for all subjects. It acknowledged that the research had occurred and that consent procedures were insufficient by modern standards. The disclosure shifted the story from archived research to public controversy. What had once been described as routine scientific study became part of a broader review of Cold War experimentation. The school itself eventually closed in 2014, decades after the experiments had ended. The records remain. The names of the institutions are documented. The acknowledgement is official. What continues to be discussed is not whether the study happened, but whether those involved understood what was being done at the time. The historical record confirms that radioactive isotopes were administered to boys at the Walter E. Fernald State School between the late 1940s and early 1950s. Federal funding connected to the Atomic Energy Commission supported aspects of the nutrition research. Scientific publications from that period document the use of radioactive calcium and iron tracers to measure nutrient absorption. The Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments, established in 1994, reviewed the available files. Their report confirmed that the research took place and that institutionalized children were used as subjects. Consent forms were obtained from parents or guardians. The language of those forms described nutrition studies. They did not clearly explain in plain terms that radioactive materials would be included in the food. The doses administered were described by researchers as low and within research standards of the time. Later medical reviews did not establish uniform long-term physical harm across all participants. Some former students reported health concerns, others reported none. The scientific data collected during the study remained part of academic literature. What changed was public awareness and ethical framing. By the standards developed after the 1970s, including the Belmont Report and modern institutional review boards, the Fernald study would not meet current requirements for informed consent involving vulnerable populations. At the time of the experiments, Federal oversight systems for human subject research were limited and decentralized. The 1998 legal settlement acknowledged that the experiments occurred and that the consent process was inadequate by modern expectations. Compensation was distributed without a formal admission of intentional harm. No criminal charges were filed. No secret archive contradicts the existence of the study. The documentation exists. The funding links exist. The advisory committee findings exist. The case now stands as a recorded example of Cold War-era human research conducted within a state institution. The confirmed facts describe a government-funded nutrition study that included radioactive tracers administered to children under institutional care. What remains debated is not whether it happened, but how it should be judged within the context of its time. And with that, the file does not disappear. It remains part of the documented record of American research history. Thank you for listening to Archive Vault Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive and found it insightful. Wishing you a great week ahead, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. We'll be back soon with more stories from the archives. See you next time.